Every war begins with a plan. Every plan begins with an assumption. And more often than not, that assumption is wrong. History shows a pattern that military institutions rarely admit. They prepare to fight the last war, not the next one. And when the next war arrives, it does not look the way they expected. The enemy they train for is rarely the enemy they actually face. Every war begins with confidence. Generals brief clean slides. Intelligence officers present threat assessments. Politicians reassure the public. The models look convincing. The simulations validate assumptions. The doctrine aligns. And yet, war has a habit of humiliating planners. Because the enemy that shows up is rarely the one that was rehearsed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Military planning does not usually fail because it is lazy. It fails because it is too certain. But here's where it gets dangerous. The more sophisticated a military becomes, the more it believes it has mapped the future. And that belief is exactly what makes it vulnerable. Military institutions require structure. They need defined threats. They need most likely scenarios. They need most dangerous scenarios. Budgets demand specificity. Procurement demands predictability. Training cycles demand repetition. You cannot build a force optimized for everything. So planners narrow the field. They choose an enemy. They define how that enemy fights. They define where that enemy fights. They define what that enemy values. Then they build a force around that model. And this is what most analysts get wrong. The enemy is watching that model too. Every adversary studies your doctrine. Every adversary analyzes your strengths. Every adversary identifies where you are overcommitted. And they adapt. Planning assumes symmetry. War thrives on asymmetry. Planning assumes rational cost-benefit calculations. War often runs on ideology, desperation, perception, or time. Planning assumes the enemy wants what you want, but insurgents want survival. Revisionist powers want leverage. Non-state actors want attention. Terrorist networks want narrative dominance. Those are not symmetric objectives. And when objectives differ, the war does not look like the planning document. Escalation. Before World War I, European powers assumed the next conflict would be short. Mobilization timetables dominated strategy. Rail schedules shaped war plans. Germany built the Schlieffen Plan around rapid encirclement. France built Plan 16 around offensive spirit. Everyone assumed speed would prevent stalemate. Instead, industrial firepower created trench warfare. Machine guns and artillery outpaced maneuver. The planners optimized for mobility. They got attrition. Millions died because assumptions outran reality. And this is where history starts repeating itself. Before World War II, France prepared to fight Germany the way it fought in World War I. Static defense, fortified lines, predictable front. The Maginot Line symbolized strategic certainty. It was engineering brilliance. It was doctrinal confidence. It was also bypassed. Germany attacked through the Ardennes. They exploited what planners dismissed as unlikely. The French army did not collapse because it lacked bravery. It collapsed because its mental model was outdated. And this is the pattern. Militaries prepare for the war they understand, not the war that is emerging. During the Cold War, NATO prepared for massed Soviet armor crossing the Fulda Gap. Heavy divisions, layered air defense, nuclear escalation ladders. The planning was detailed. The simulations were constant. Everything revolved around large-scale mechanized warfare in Europe. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. The enemy disappeared. But the force structure did not disappear overnight. Institutions resist rapid transformation because transformation is expensive, because careers are tied to doctrine, because procurement pipelines last decades. And here's the part that changes everything. The military that wins the last war gains prestige. Prestige reinforces doctrine. Doctrine becomes orthodoxy. Orthodoxy becomes rigidity. Then the next war arrives, and it looks different. When the United States entered Afghanistan in 2001, conventional dominance was overwhelming. Air power crushed Taliban formations. Special operations teams enabled precision strikes. The regime collapsed rapidly. That initial phase validated the model. But then the war changed. Insurgency emerged. Decentralized networks replaced organized formations. Improvised explosive devices replaced armored divisions. There were no fixed front lines, no clear decisive engagement. The enemy dissolved into the population. And this is what most institutions struggle with. Conventional militaries excel at destroying structured forces. They struggle when the enemy refuses structure. Iraq followed a similar arc. Rapid regime collapse in 2003. Precision maneuver, speed, overmatch. Then fragmentation, sectarian violence, insurgency, urban warfare. The planning assumptions emphasized regime defeat. The strategic reality shifted toward political stabilization. Military planning assumed one phase would decide the conflict. It did not, and that misalignment cost years. Military planning assumes the enemy will fight where you are strong, because that is where traditional victory occurs. Decisive battle, massed engagement, clear terrain objectives. But adversaries increasingly fight where you are weak. Cyber domains, information space, gray zone operations, political warfare, economic coercion, maritime militia, proxy forces. You prepare for tanks, they deploy narratives. You prepare for air superiority, they deploy denial systems. You prepare for maneuver, they deploy ambiguity. And this is where modern planning faces its biggest challenge. The battlefield is no longer singular. It is multi-domain. It is cognitive. It is informational. It is economic. If your planning model isolates combat from politics, you are already behind. We are not even at the most dangerous part yet, because the future enemy will not simply avoid your strengths, they will exploit your predictability. They will study your training cycles. They will track your procurement timelines. They will map your escalation thresholds. They will probe your political tolerance, and they will design conflict beneath those thresholds. That is not conventional war. That is strategic erosion. Today, the United States publicly frames pacing threats in terms of near-peer competitors. China, Russia, high-end warfare, anti-access espionage area denial systems, hypersonics, carrier killer missiles, space denial, cyber warfare. And that focus makes sense, because large-scale conventional conflict between major powers would be catastrophic. So planning orients toward it. War games simulate Taiwan. War games simulate Baltic invasions. War games simulate escalation ladders. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The more attention placed on high-end conflict, the more likely adversaries will operate just below it. Russia did not roll tanks into NATO territory first. It used hybrid warfare. It used disinformation. It used deniable forces. It used political fragmentation. China does not begin with amphibious assault. It begins with economic leverage, information shaping, maritime militia, legal warfare, strategic patience. And this is what most planners underestimate. Great powers do not open with their strongest punch. They probe for weakness. They stretch timelines. They exploit ambiguity. They weaponize political hesitation. If you only plan for the decisive invasion scenario, you may miss the incremental erosion happening for years beforehand. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because democracies are slower to recognize gradual loss than sudden attack. The psychological bias. Military planning suffers from cognitive bias, confirmation bias, recency bias, institutional inertia. After a major war, planners overcorrect. After Vietnam, the U.S. military reoriented toward conventional conflict. After Iraq and Afghanistan, the focus shifted back toward near-peer competition. The pendulum swings, but the world does not move in pendulums. It evolves. Threats layer. Adversaries hybridize methods. Insurgency tactics merge with high-end technology. Drones once reserved for state militaries now appear in the hands of militias. Commercial satellite imagery levels, intelligence asymmetry. Artificial intelligence accelerates adaptation. But here's the part that changes everything. Technology compresses time. If adaptation cycles shorten, rigid planning becomes even more dangerous. Because by the time a procurement program finishes, the threat environment may already be different. The AI and autonomous shift. Autonomous systems are redefining battlefield assumptions. Drones saturate airspace. Loitering munitions change artillery dynamics. Unmanned naval systems challenge fleet dominance. Artificial intelligence enhances targeting cycles. If your planning model assumes human-centered tempo, you may underestimate machine-speed decision loops. And this is what most analysts get wrong. The next major surprise may not be a new weapon. It may be a new tempo, a conflict where decision cycles occur faster than political oversight, faster than traditional command structures, faster than institutional adaptation. If planning assumes yesterday's speed, it will fail at tomorrow's pace. So why does military planning repeatedly assume the wrong enemy? Because certainty is comfortable, specificity is fundable, clarity is promotable, ambiguity is not. It is easier to brief a defined adversary. It is easier to build a force around a singular pacing threat. It is easier to measure readiness against a modeled opponent. But war punishes comfort. War punishes rigidity. War punishes overconfidence in prediction. The enemy always has a vote, and that vote is rarely cast in the format you prepared for. The problem is not that militaries plan. The problem is that they plan for precision instead of adaptability. You cannot eliminate uncertainty, but you can design forces that tolerate it. Mission command over centralized micromanagement. Red teaming institutionalized. Procurement cycles shortened. Cross-domain integration normalized. Education that rewards intellectual flexibility instead of doctrinal memorization. The most resilient militaries in history were not the ones that predicted perfectly. They were the ones that adjusted fastest. Germany adapted stormtrooper tactics in World War I when stalemate emerged. The United States adapted carrier warfare in World War II after Pearl Harbor. Israel adapted rapidly after early losses in the Yom Kippur War. Adaptation did not eliminate surprise. It mitigated its consequences. Military planning will always assume the wrong enemy in some way. Because the enemy is thinking. Because the enemy is adapting. Because the enemy wants to invalidate your preparation. The goal is not predictive perfection. The goal is institutional agility. The question is not, did we guess correctly? The question is, how fast can we adjust when we guessed wrong? That shift in mindset changes everything. Military planning assumes the wrong enemy because humans crave certainty. But war is the most uncertain environment imaginable. The decisive factor in modern conflict will not be who predicted the future most accurately. It will be who adapts fastest when the prediction fails. The side that survives is not the side that prepared for one enemy. It is the side that prepared for change itself. Speed of learning, speed of integration, speed of adjustment. That is the real competitive advantage. And that advantage cannot be built overnight. It must be institutionalized. Because the next enemy will not look like the last one, and it will not fight the way you expect. The only question is whether your system can evolve before it is forced to. History suggests most cannot, but history also shows that those who can win.